Anti-intellectualism. Let's do it. Time for my hot take. There have been lots of recent videos on BookTube as of late discussing the rise of anti-intellectualism in the online bookish community. Basically, all they calling people stupid. But actually, no, not really. We'll get into exactly what anti-intellectualism means later in this video. If you're wondering, the current wave of this conversation was recatalyzed mostly by a creator by the name of Celine on Book Talk. I will link her original video in the description, but in that video she talks about the rise of anti-intellectualism in the community and specifically on Book Talk, discussing how it has come to shape the way that we talk about books online, how the algorithm plays a role in that, and how ultimately this has an effect on publishing as well. It's actually a really good video and I agreed with a lot of her points, so I do implore you to check it out, as well as the 2 follow-up videos that she posted consecutively after that. Today I wanted to have a discussion about this topic and give you my unsolicited 2 cents. You're probably thinking, Sajid, this conversation is already so over-discussed and oversaturated. Why do you feel the need to? Because I can do whatever the hell I want to do. Okay? Thank you. I want to first start off by playing devil's advocate for the people who don't necessarily see the necessity in critically reading or being intellectual in the way that they discuss books online, because I do feel like there are some valid points to be made there. Then I want to circle back to why I, at the end of the day, think that this is a good conversation and a good thing to be called out, and why I value intellectual reading myself. And the final point I'll be making is about our responsibility as both content creators on the bookish platform, as well as readers and consumers of bookish content. First of all, I think we need to agree on one thing, which is that the reason why most people read is for entertainment. So it's remiss of us to expect that everyone who reads should be reading with this critical lens all the time, and should always have something to say about a book other than they liked it, they thought the plot was fun, they thought the characters were cute, they thought the dialogue was good. Sometimes that's just what people want to talk about when they talk about books, and that is totally and completely fine. It's very easy to call people stupid and lament the lack of critical thinking around you. But it's also important to remember that most people are just not really inclined to think about or engaged with the world around them in a critical or analytical way all the time, because we are raised in a society where that particular quality is just really not valued and it's not instilled in people. And all of this is not to say that those people do not have the capacity to think and read critically or anything like that. It's just that they'd rather not do that, because again, that is not a quality that is heavily valued, and it's not something that people strive to do. So you have people who have the intellectual capacity, who can do those things, but they just would rather not, or in many cases, and most cases actually, they reserve that aspect of their thinking for when they are doing their jobs or for when they're in school and that kind of stuff. But when they come out of those spaces, they just want to have a good time. And can you blame them? I also think that sometimes people who are intellectuals can unintentionally, or in some cases intentionally, come across as a bit snobbish or assholish. I mean, sometimes people are just assholes and think that having an education or being intellectual, or pretending to be intellectual in some cases, makes them better than other people, okay? But then other times you have well-meaning intellectuals who may genuinely notice problematic beliefs and patterns of thinking within the wider world around them, and they want to call that out, they want to rightfully and validly complain about it, but the way that they do it isn't necessarily always the best. The problem is when they start saying things like, everyone in this country is so stupid and y'all have no education and why don't you read a damn book? Raise your hand if you're guilty of thinking like that and saying shit like that, because yes, this is a very easy line of thinking to fall into, and while your perspective may be valid, speaking down on and insulting people for not knowing as much as you do or for not thinking in the way that you do is not the best way to engage with ignorance and anti-intellectualism. I've seen people lament anti-intellectualism in the book community, and what they do is they just end up going after romance readers and YA readers, or people who are just having fun making videos and stuff, like, back in the BookTube days when you had all these white men coming online and talking about people who were wearing too much blush and using studio lights, and as though as if that has something to do with the content creator's capacity to talk about books in a meaningful way. And speaking of that, I think it's worth noting that a lot of this pro-intellectualist punching down can be informed by racist, misogynistic, and even classist bias. Think about how many times you see some of these literary dude bros talking down on romance books and books by women or books about women and women's issues under the guise of being intellectual and critiquing the stories for their lack of like rigor or whatever. These are the same people who complain about diversity in literature being some sort of like surface level pandering agenda, which I did kind of speak to in one of my previous videos where I talked about reading diversely versus reading based on merit and just the whole hypocrisy that comes with ideas of meritocracy and what kind of literature is of value. You should definitely go check that video out because it's good. Now I call out all of these sort of intellectual prototypes, right? But what's important to understand is that Celine's original video, which sparked all of this conversation, does not fall into any of these categories. And the people who are accusing Celine of being elitist and judgmental of other readers and whatnot, I think really missed the point of what she was trying to say in those original videos that she posted on TikTok. And that leads me to the second portion of this video, why I do agree that anti-intellectualism is a problem in the book community and why it deserves to be called out. Firstly, I think we need to clarify exactly what we mean by anti-intellectualism. I get the impression that a lot of people think that anti-intellectualism is just not speaking about your books in a very smartical way. But actually, if you do a quick Google search and check different sources from like Wikipedia to actual scholarly articles, you'll find that the general gist of anti-intellectualism as a concept is the sort of like deliberate and intentional, those being very keywords, right? It is a very deliberate and intentional rejection of intellectual and critical thought, as well as a sort of like mistrust of experts and scholars in a particular field. Think of when you're trying to have a conversation with somebody who's ignorant about a particular topic, right? Some of you are probably going to experience this in like a month or so, those of you all in the global north who celebrating Thanksgiving and you're gonna have to see your really problematic relatives and stuff. Rest in peace, have a good time, my condolences, I'm sorry about that, hope the turkey tastes good. You might explain the nuances of a particular topic, the historical context, you may even reference research that you have done on the topic to say, hey, you know, this is actually what is being said and this is how you need to understand what's going on, and they just don't want to hear it. It's not that they can't understand what you're saying, it's that they're choosing not to. So instead they will respond by just, you know, throwing back straw man arguments at you or trying to make you look like a fool or making a joke out of it, or as most people do, they'll just ignore it. They'll just like change the topic because they just don't want to engage. That's anti-intellectualism. At least that's my understanding of it. And this is where critical and analytical reading comes in, because it's not that critically reading books is difficult. It's that critically reading books is uncomfortable. I don't think Celine was just trying to talk about the ways in which the current algorithm favored content is just reducing books to tropes and feelings that you have when you read them. Like, that's definitely like a part of what she was saying. But I think a wider thing that she was really trying to talk about was the larger issue of popular bookish content creators not wanting to engage critically or intellectually with the books that they're reading. They don't want to challenge themselves to understand the wider context and themes of the story. They would rather just be like, oh, this has a cute romance, the fantasy elements are really cool, the plot was great. And you know, those things are great things to talk about. And you know, I think you can also see that you can actually speak about these things in a way that sounds intellectual, because you can go on and on about like the dialogue and the writing and the world building and all that kind of stuff. But if you miss like other aspects of the story, bigger aspects of the story that may have to do with war, poverty, classism, sexism, hierarchy within specific societies, to some people watching your content, it'll just be like, oh, you read this book and that's all you took away from it. Or maybe you took away a lot from it, but you just made a short form video where you're recommending books based on tropes. You know, I don't have a problem with the short form content at all. I'm sorry, y'all. I thought I could survive without the AC for this one go, but it's not working out. Okay. Yeah, as I was saying, I don't think that type of content is the problem. I think the fact that that type of content is what is popular and what is the most sort of like consumed is the issue. And I know what you're going to say. Short form content is where we are right now in the world, and that is fine. And in fact, some of these videos really help people to find books and different recommendations. There's also a really good way to grow your channels and your platforms and to connect with other readers. Obviously, if you're recommending 10 books in a 15-second video, people can just go look up the titles of the books and look into more in-depth reviews so that they can get more information about the books. I think the issue here as well is I'm over here, you know, editing videos that are above 10 minutes long where I'm really sort of delving into, you know, the themes and the ideas in the stories that I read and that I talk about. But yet I would post stuff on TikTok or in YouTube Shorts and then it's getting like thousands upon thousands of views, and it's like, whoa, you know, like the content that I'm actually putting the most thought into and that I am, you know, really, really passionate about is not really getting the kind of attention that the content that I just sort of like do on a whim is getting, right? A point that Celine was making about that actually is that this sort of like surface level reviewing and reducing books to tropes and all of that kind of stuff also shapes and impacts publishing, the kind of books that are being published, because at the end of the day, publishers don't care about themes and issues in novels. They care about what will make people want to buy their books. And if people are looking for books and shopping for books based on things like, you know, spice level, and if the romance was cute and love triangle and strong female protagonist and that's all they're looking for, you know, sometimes what you end up having is these hollow stories that are just sort of magnifications of a particular trope. I am saying what I am hearing people in the book community saying. I don't know if this is an actual problem that is really affecting publishing. I haven't looked into that myself, and I generally don't read those types of books to know if that is an issue, like if these sort of genre fiction novels are becoming more hollow or whatever. So please, you know, feel free to elaborate on that in the comments. Now I have to compete with the rain. So if I'm shouting, that's why. This anti-intellectualist mindset also becomes a bigger problem when you're talking about books by marginalized authors, or books that are meant to explore themes of, as I said, racism, misogyny, hierarchy, etc., etc. One of my absolute favorite books of all time is The Diviners by Libba Bray. I read this back in 2014 and I reread it last year, and I finally read the second book for the first time. Didn't read the third and fourth books as yet. But when I first read The Diviners, if you know, go back to 2014 Sajid and ask him, you know, like, what is this book about? I would be like, oh, it's like a cool 1920s sort of paranormal story about these teenagers with magical powers who are being hunted by this demon or whatever. And that is, you know, at the baseline what this story is about. But actually, reading this with a different lens, I realized that it's so much more than that. This whole story functions as an allegory for the ways in which 1920s America was designed specifically for cis-het Christian white men. Other people who did not fall into that category were vilified in different ways. Their differences and the things that made them unique also made them targets. Hence the whole allegory with the demons hunting down the special teenagers. It's a brilliant, brilliant series, and reading it without that lens will just have you look at this story as like paranormal horror, teenagers trying to fight against these demonic bad guys or whatever. And yes, that's what this story is about, but it's so much more than that. And that is why critically reading and reading with an intellectual lens is so important, because you miss out on a lot. And not only do you miss out on a lot, but in many cases you purposefully ignore some of the things that you know the story may be talking about, but because it puts you in an uncomfortable position, and because you may feel like that's not something important and that's not something you would care to engage with, it shapes the way you talk about the books. It also shapes the way people perceive the books as well, especially if you are a content creator with a big platform. On the flip side of that, you may have books that are actually problematic or that have really harmful themes and ideas, represented in them. And so some content creators and readers may call that out in the community. They may say X book is bad because XYZ, and then somebody would respond to that saying, well, let people enjoy things. Oh, it's not that deep or whatever. And that also is a perfect example of anti-intellectualism. It's a lack of desire to engage with and an intentional rejection of any sort of critical discourse on a book. You can read a problematic story and enjoy it, but still acknowledge that there are certain things about the book that were a bit iffy and that need to be critically assessed and that need to be discussed and that need to be called out. Two things could exist at the same time, but people just don't want to hear that type of stuff because, again, it makes them uncomfortable. As I was saying before, it seems to me, based on what I am learning about anti-intellectualism, is that anti-intellectualism, a lot of it has to do with people's discomfort and lack of desire to step out of their comfort zone to engage critically with things. Not just because engaging critically is difficult, but because it requires maybe you looking at yourself in the mirror and sort of having to reconcile with the fact that you need to relearn certain things. You need to change the way that you think about the world and the people around you. And that does not require being a literary scholar. And listen, this is another aspect of the conversation that I have been seeing and that I don't think is worth my time or anybody's time, is this question of whether we need to be producing scholarly level analyses of books as bookstagrammers, booktalkers, and booktubers. I don't think anybody on any camp of this discussion or this debate is asking that of anyone. Nobody thinks, if you are a literary scholar or if you want to take a scholarly approach to the way that you review books, that is great. I'll watch your videos. That sounds cool. That sounds fun. But nobody is expecting that from the average booktuber, the average person. That kind of leads into the last part of this video that I want to move on to, and that is sort of content creator responsibility, as well as content consumer responsibility, because we don't really talk about that as much. So for content creators, I want to start off by saying that just because you are not obligated to do something does not mean that you don't have a responsibility. If you have a huge platform and you're talking about books that delve into bigger picture topics and issues, again, you are not obligated to talk about those things. You can just talk about the things that you like or the things that you didn't like about the story. But if you have a platform, I personally believe, and this is just my opinion, that there is some level of responsibility to speak a little bit more about the broader themes and issues within a book. I personally believe that you can speak about any book in an intellectual way. All books are political. All books have something that can be said about them bigger than the actual plot itself. And a lot of the times you can say something intellectual and critical about a book by simply asking yourself questions about why you feel the way you feel about the book. So maybe you read a romance book, right? And you say that the dialogue is cute, right? And that's all you say about the dialogue. What more can you say about that? Well, ask yourself, why was the dialogue cute? What did you like about the dialogue? Was it that the hero or the love interest or whatever you call it in the story, maybe they were very communicative and they were very big on consent and centering their partner's feelings, and that is something that you value in your relationships in your life. The dialogue represented a kind of communication that reflects your personal values and your interests when it comes to relationships. You see, you could turn something that is very, very simple into something a lot more profound and interesting without sounding overly complex or intellectual by simply just asking yourself questions about the way that you feel about something. It's like doing therapy with yourself. Why do you feel like that? Where do you think this feeling comes from? That's the thing about critically reading too. It also kind of tells you stuff about yourself. When you ask questions about why you feel the way you feel about the books that you read, you begin to actually learn about your own values and your own implicit perspectives and worldviews, and it allows you to grow as a person. So I really encourage you to practice these things when you're reading and reviewing books. And I want you to understand that it's okay to have a mixture of different types of content. You can absolutely do the short form 5-second videos and whatnot. That is totally fine. But I feel like if you're balancing that with videos that are interesting and saying something more substantive about the books that you're reading, even though people may be coming to your channel or to your platform because they found the fun 15-second video of you like just doing this to a pile of books or whatever, they may end up being exposed to content that more interestingly talks about those very books. I enjoy doing my little short form videos. It's really fun, it's very easy, it gets people, you know, coming to your channel and discovering you, but you find that they end up staying because they like what you have to say about the books, not what you know, think, you know, what trope the book falls into in a 10-second video. And I think that goes into consumer responsibility. We often talk about influencer responsibility when we talk about like the online bookish community or any online community. But I also feel like at the end of the day, consumers are the ones who shape the algorithm. The algorithm, yes, feeds you stuff, but if you are eating what is being fed and you're just eating that up, like, you are also part of the problem. I feel like, you know, if you value intellectual, you know, and critical analysis of the books that you read, I think that you can very much just look for that. You know, people are there. There are people on all of these platforms who are doing that kind of stuff. And you have a responsibility as a consumer to go look for that type of content, seek it out, like it, and all that kind of stuff. And once you do that, the algorithm will feed you that kind of stuff, and once more people do that, that type of content is what will be valued. That brings me to the end of this video. I need to go drink some water because I've been talking too much. In the comments down below, I would love to know your thoughts on this conversation. Please, please, please let me know. If you made it to the end of this video, you can leave a brain emoji or maybe a light bulb emoji to let me know that you've made it to the end. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. I make videos about books, but I also like to do a lot of discussion videos and stuff like that. So if that's something that interests you, and if that's something that you value as a bookish content consumer online, definitely stick around. I have some fun stuff planned for the month of October. All of that being said, thank you all ever so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely day, and until next time, inshallah, keep reading.